Ma'am.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Years that you've had. And you were commenting on the fact that all of these problems belong to Joe Biden, and they do. However, if it wasn't for your vote, we would not have Joe Biden in the White House.
Right.
Joe Biden shouldn't be there. And all those wonderful things that you and Trump were doing together would be continuing, and this country would be on the right path. Do you ever second guess yourself? That was a constitutional right that you had to send those votes back to the states. It was not like you were going to personally elect him. We all know by the number of votes that were there who won that election.
Well, let me speak to that
Changed
issue.
history for this country.
Yeah, let me speak to the issue, because I think it's an issue that continues to be misunderstood. But I know by God's grace I did exactly what the Constitution of the United States required of me that day. And I kept my oath. But let me be very respectful of the question and tell you, look, states conduct our elections. You never want to let Washington, D.C. run elections. And you certainly would never want one person in Washington, D.C. to decide who the President of the United States is going to be.
You were just sending it back to the states.
Ma'am, let me explain it to you. States conduct elections. Iowa, where I live in Indiana. And after there were questions in a half a dozen or so states, we had reviews of the results, 60 different lawsuits that went to the courts. Where there are questions, there's two ways that they're reviewed. Number one is you take those issues to the legal process in the state for recounts, okay? Secondly, you take them to the courts, which we did very aggressively. Now, there were voting irregularities that took place. You had a half a dozen states that changed the rules in the name of COVID, but the courts upheld those changes in virtually every instance, and in every instance where they would have had any impact whatsoever. At the end of the day, when Iowa certified your results and sent them to Washington, D.C., when Indiana certified our results, the Constitution of the United States in Article 2 says the job of the Vice President is to serve as the presiding officer of a joint session where you open and count the votes. Don't take my word for it. Go read the Constitution. Not really. I say this with great affection and respect. The Constitution is very clear. My job was to oversee a session of Congress where objections could be heard, and I made sure that objections would be recognized. So we would hear whatever evidence or whether debate there was, but the Constitution says you open and count the votes, no more, no less. The Constitution affords no authority for the Vice President or anyone else to reject votes or return votes to the states. Never been done before, should never be done in the future. I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's actually what the Constitution says. No Vice President in American history ever asserted the authority that you have been convinced that I had. But I want to tell you, with all due respect, I said when I announced, President Trump was wrong about my authority that day, and he's still wrong. I believe it with all my heart. Now, that being said, I am encouraged by the fact that states around the country have been passing changes in election laws at the state level that are protecting the integrity of the vote. I frankly think we ought to have voter ID in every state in this country. I really do. But at the end of the day, I will also say to you that while I believe by God's grace that I did my duty that day, I do. No second guessing. I really think that this election has got to be about the future. If we spend the next election talking about the past, you're going to get 4 more years of Democrats in the White House. Our candidates that spent the 22 midterm elections talking about relitigating the last election lost, and they lost in places that we should have won. So I promise you, I'm going to stand on what I did. I'm going to stand on the Constitution, and any job I ever have in the future, I promise you, I'll keep my oath even when it hurts, like it says in Psalm 15. That's the job that you have. You raise your right hand and you promise to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I believe we did that.